In 1997, a 10-year-old girl and her grandmother vanished from their Portland home. No break-ins, no witnesses, and no explanation. An empty house, the television flickering quietly, and dinner left to cool on the stove. For 27 years, Rachel Rinters endured the unbearable silence of not knowing what had become of her family. But in 2024, when a new family begins renovating that same house, they uncover something hidden behind the walls, something that suggests Emma and Patricia never truly left. If you're drawn to true crime mysteries and unsolved disappearances, subscribe and turn on notifications for new videos. The kitchen timer chimed precisely at 6:47 p.m., its cheerful ding slicing through the quiet of the Elderwood Lane house. Patricia Kellerman wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and opened the oven door, letting the warm aroma of roasting chicken fill the room. Behind her, 10-year-old Emma sat at the kitchen table, colored pencils scattered across her homework like bright confetti.
Almost ready, sweetheart.
Patricia said as she checked the meat thermometer.
Yes, please. Your mother should be home in about 40 minutes.
Emma didn't look up from her drawing. In the margins of her math worksheet, she was quietly sketching something. A house with too many windows. A tree with twisted branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. "Can I watch my show while we wait?" Emma asked. Patricia glanced at the clock on the microwave. 20 minutes, then you need to finish that homework before dinner. Emma slid from her chair and padded into the living room, her sock feet silent on the hardwood floor. Patricia heard the television click on, followed by the familiar theme song of some children's program filling the house. She turned her attention back to the chicken, basting it carefully, adjusting the roasted vegetables arranged around it. The doorbell rang. Patricia frowned, wiping her hands again as she walked toward the front door. They weren't expecting anyone. Rachel wouldn't be home from the hospital for another half hour at least, and she had her key anyway. Through the frosted glass panels beside the door, she could see a dark silhouette on the porch. "Who is it?" she called out. "Delivery, ma'am," came a muffled male voice. "Need a signature?" Patricia unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door, keeping the chain engaged. A man in his 30s stood on the porch, wearing what looked like a delivery uniform, though she couldn't make out the company name in the failing evening light. He held a clipboard and wore a pleasant smile. "I'm not expecting any deliveries," Patricia said. "It's for Rachel Winters," the man replied, checking his clipboard. "Medical supplies. Says it needs refrigeration, so I can't just leave it." Patricia hesitated. Rachel did occasionally receive medical samples from pharmaceutical representatives at work, though they usually went directly to the hospital. Still, perhaps something had been rerouted. "Just a moment," she said, closing the door to release the chain. In the living room, Emma remained focused on her television program, unaware of the visitor. The cartoon characters on screen laughed and played, their bright voices filling the space. Patricia opened the door fully. What happened next would haunt Rachel Winters for the next 27 years, playing in an endless loop through her nightmares, each imagined scenario more terrible than the last. Because when Rachel arrived home at 7:23 p.m., she found the front door standing wide open, cool October air spilling into the house. The television was still on, the volume turned up slightly too loud. In the kitchen, the timer had been beeping for 36 minutes. The chicken was now dry and overdone in the cooling oven. Emma's homework remained spread across the table, her colored pencils still uncapped. But Patricia and Emma were gone.
Rachel would later tell police that she knew immediately. It was the way a mother knows, the way the body recognizes disaster before the mind can name it. She called out for them anyway, her voice climbing from casual greeting to desperate scream as she searched every room. She ran through the house, checking closets, bathrooms, even the crawl space beneath the stairs. She looked in the backyard, in the garage, up and down the quiet street, where nothing moved except fallen leaves stirring in the October wind. The police found no signs of struggle, no blood, no overturned furniture, no broken windows. Patricia's purse sat on the hallway table, her car keys hanging on the hook by the door. Emma's jacket still hung in the coat closet. The house was simply empty, as if two people had stepped out of existence between heartbeats, leaving behind only the evidence of interrupted life. Homework undone, dinner growing cold, a television broadcasting to an empty room. 27 years later, the truth about that October evening would finally surface, buried not in case files or witness statements, but in the walls of the house itself. The sledgehammer hit the wall with a satisfying crack, and dust exploded into the air like a small detonation. Marcus Chen stepped back, coughing, and waved away the cloud of plaster particles that hung in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. "You're supposed to wear the mask," his wife Alicia called from the hallway, her voice muffled behind her own dust mask. Marcus pulled the forgotten mask up over his nose and mouth, grinning sheepishly behind the fabric. "Right, safety first." They had closed on the house 3 weeks ago, drawn by the surprisingly low price for the Laurelhurst neighborhood, and charmed by the original 1920s craftsmanship beneath decades of questionable updates. The real estate agent had been upfront about the property's history: a disappearance in 1997, unsolved, no bodies ever found. But Marcus and Alicia weren't superstitious people. They were practical, budget-conscious, and thrilled to finally own a home in Portland after years of renting.
The master bedroom was their first major renovation project. The previous owners had installed cheap paneling over the original plaster walls sometime in the 80s, and Marcus had spent the morning carefully prying it away. Beneath the paneling, they'd found beautiful horsehair plaster that just needed cleaning and minor repairs. Marcus swung the sledgehammer again, targeting a section of wall near the closet that sounded hollow when tapped. The impact sent fractured spiderwebbing across the surface. Another swing, and a chunk of plaster fell away, revealing the wooden lath beneath. "How's it going?" Alicia asked, appearing in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a bandana, her jeans covered in dust. "Good. This section's almost clear." Marcus raised the sledgehammer for another strike. The wall gave way with less resistance than expected, and Marcus stumbled forward slightly as the sledgehammer punched through into empty space beyond the lath. Not the expected wall cavity, but something larger, darker. "Whoa," Marcus said, lowering the tool. "There's definitely something behind here." Alicia moved closer, peering at the hole. "What do you mean something? A space? It feels big." Marcus grabbed his flashlight from the tool belt and shone it through the opening. The beam revealed a narrow room, maybe 4 feet wide and 8 feet long, with walls of exposed brick. No windows. A bare light bulb hung from the ceiling on a frayed wire. "Is that a closet?" Alicia asked, confusion in her voice. "Why would someone wall it off?"
Marcus widened the hole, pulling away chunks of plaster and snapping through lath slats until the opening was large enough to step through. Cool air drifted out, carrying a stale, musty odor that made both of them wrinkle their noses. "Should we call someone?" Alicia asked. "I mean, before we just go in there." "It's our house," Marcus said, though he felt the same hesitation. Something about the hidden room felt wrong, like a secret that should have stayed buried. But curiosity overcame caution. He stepped through the opening, ducking slightly, and played his flashlight around the small space. The room was completely bare, except for a single wooden chair against the far wall. The brick was water-stained in places, and the concrete floor looked original to the house's 1920s construction. Cobwebs draped the corners like gauze. "There's nothing here," Marcus called back. "Just an empty room. Maybe old storage, or—" His flashlight beam caught something on the floor near the chair. Scratches? No, not scratches. Marcus crouched down, his heart beginning to pound as his brain made sense of what he was seeing. Words carved into the concrete with something sharp, the letters rough and desperate. "Help us. Emma, 10. Patricia, K." Alicia's sharp intake of breath told him she'd stepped in behind him and seen it too. "Marcus," she whispered, "those are the names from 1997, the girl and the grandmother who vanished." Marcus stood slowly, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand as he swept it around the room again. How had they missed it before? In the corner, barely visible against the dark break. More scratches, tally marks,
hundreds of them scored into the brick in clusters of 5, covering nearly 3 feet of wall. Days counted. Days survived. "We need to call the police," Alicia said, her voice tight. "Right now." Marcus nodded, unable to tear his eyes away from the tally marks. Someone had been in this room. Someone had counted the days, carved desperate messages into concrete, sat in that wooden chair in the darkness behind that sealed wall. He backed out of the room, his skin crawling with the certainty that they had just disturbed a grave, not of bodies, but of suffering.
Whatever had happened in that hidden room, it had been deliberate. Someone had built that wall, concealed that space, erased it from existence. And according to the real estate records, only 3 people had owned this house since its construction in 1923. The original builders, who sold it in 1948, the Morrison family, who lived here from 1948 until 1991, and then Gordon Hale, who purchased it in 1991 and lived here until his death in 2019. Gordon Hale, who had been living in this house when Emma Winters and Patricia Kellerman disappeared from it on October 14th, 1997. Alicia was already pulling out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed 911. Marcus took one last look at the hidden room, at the message carved by desperate hands in the darkness, and felt cold certainty settle in his chest. They hadn't vanished. They'd been taken. And whoever had taken them had kept them here, in this house, in this terrible secret room, while the world outside searched in vain. The police arrived within 12 minutes. 2 patrol officers, followed shortly by a detective in plainclothes who introduced herself as Detective Sarah Moreno. She was in her late 40s, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a practical ponytail and sharp eyes that took in every detail of the scene. By the time the sun began to set, the house was flooded with portable work lights and swarming with crime scene technicians. Marcus and Alicia sat in their kitchen, the only room not currently occupied by investigators, watching through the doorway as people in white suits photographed and measured every inch of the hidden room. The property records show Gordon Hale purchased this house in 1991, Detective Moreno said, settling into the chair across from them. She had a worn leather notebook open in front of her, pages covered in neat handwriting. 6 years before the disappearance. Did your real estate agent mention him at all? Only that he died in 2019, and the house went through probate, Marcus replied. We never met him. Did she mention how he died? Marcus and Alicia exchanged glances. No, Alicia said. Should she have?
Detective Moreno tapped her pen against the notebook. Gordon Hale died of a heart attack in this house. He was 73, lived alone. It took 3 days for anyone to notice because he was semi-reclusive. Grocery deliveries, minimal contact with neighbors. The estate was settled through a distant cousin in California who'd never visited the property. She paused, letting them absorb this. The cousin hired a company to clean out the house and sell it furnished. Basic staging, minor cosmetic updates. They never did major renovations, never looked behind the walls. So this room has been here, sealed up, for 27 years, Alicia said quietly. It appears so. Detective Moreno's expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus could see the tension in her jaw. We're bringing in ground-penetrating radar to check the rest of the house, the yard too. The implication hung heavy in the air. They were looking for bodies. A crime scene technician appeared in the doorway holding an evidence bag. Inside was a small pink barrette, the kind a young girl might wear. The plastic was discolored with age, but the shape was unmistakable. Found it under the chair, the technician said. There's hair still attached.
Detective Moreno stood, taking the bag carefully. She held it up to the light, examining the contents. We'll run DNA, compare it against the samples from the original investigation. Emma Winters had a toothbrush in her bathroom that was never collected. After 27 years, we might finally get confirmation. Confirmation of what? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. That Emma Winters was in that room. Detective Moreno's voice was steady, professional, but Marcus caught the flash of anger in her eyes. That she was alive in this house after she disappeared, that someone held her here. And the grandmother? Alicia asked.
The messages on the floor listed both names. "We're treating this as a double kidnapping and probable double homicide." She closed her notebook. "I need to make some calls. We're going to be here most of the night processing the scene. I'd recommend finding somewhere else to stay." Marcus nodded numbly. The house that had seemed like such a bargain, such a perfect opportunity, now felt contaminated. He couldn't imagine sleeping here, walking these floors, knowing what had happened in the sealed-off room. After Detective Moreno left to coordinate with her team, Alicia reached across the table and took Marcus's hand. "This is going to be everywhere," she said quietly, "once the media finds out." She was right. By morning, the story would spread. Hidden room discovered. 27-year-old cold case reopened. Possible evidence of kidnapping and murder. Their house would become infamous, a landmark of tragedy. Through the kitchen doorway, Marcus watched the investigators working. One of them was carefully photographing the tally marks on the brick wall, camera flash illuminating each cluster of desperate scratches. 463 tallies. He'd heard someone count. 463 days. "Detective Moreno," a voice called from deeper in the house. "You need to see this."
They heard footsteps, urgent conversation, then silence. Minutes passed. Marcus stood and moved to the doorway, unable to resist the pull of knowing. In the hidden room, Detective Moreno stood with her flashlight pointed at the brick wall behind where the chair had been. Another technician was carefully brushing away decades of dust and cobwebs from the surface. Beneath the grime, scratched into the brick with the same desperate determination as the tally marks, were words. A message. The letters were small, cramped, some barely legible, but clear enough to read. "He watches from the attic. The red door in the basement. He said we could never leave. He said no one would believe. Mama, I'm sorry." The last line broke something in Marcus's chest. A child's apology carved in desperation, preserved in brick for nearly 3 decades. Detective Moreno's hand moved to her radio. "I need additional units at this location. We're expanding the search to include the attic and basement, possible additional concealed spaces." She turned and saw Marcus in the doorway. Her expression softened slightly. "Mr. Chen, I really need you and your wife to leave the premises now. This is an active crime scene, and it's going to be a very long night." Marcus retreated to the kitchen, where Alicia was already packing a bag with essentials. They would stay at a hotel. They would try to sleep, though Marcus doubted either of them would manage it. As they left through the front door, Marcus glanced back at the house. Crime scene tape now cordoned off the entire property, portable lights blazing from every window. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk across the street, phones out, filming, whispering. Somewhere in Portland, Rachel Winters was about to receive a phone call that would upend her entire world. After 27 years of not knowing, she was about to learn that her daughter and mother had never left this house, that they had been here all along, trapped in darkness, counting days, carving messages that no one would read for decades. Marcus wondered what would be worse, the years of not knowing, or finally knowing the truth.
Rachel Winters was restocking exam room supplies when her phone vibrated in her pocket. She'd worked as a nurse at Providence Portland Medical Center for 32 years, the last 15 in the pediatric wing. The routine of her shifts had become a comfort, a way to move through time without thinking too much about the calendar, about the dates that still carved themselves into her consciousness every October. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Probably spam. She silenced it and returned to counting tongue depressors. The phone rang again immediately. Same number. Rachel frowned and answered. "Hello? Is this Rachel Winters?" A woman's voice, professional and careful in a way that made Rachel's stomach tighten. "Yes, who's calling?" "Miss Winters, this is Detective Sarah Moreno with the Portland Police Bureau. I'm calling about your mother, Patricia Kellerman, and your daughter, Emma Winters. Do you have a moment to speak?" The world tilted slightly. Rachel steadied herself against the exam table,
the box of tongue depressors falling from her hands and scattering across the floor. 27 years, and the mere mention of their names by a police detective could still make her knees weak. "What's happened?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you find them?" There was a pause, and in that silence, Rachel felt the weight of every possibility. Remains discovered in a forest. Evidence of foul play finally confirmed. The closure everyone had promised would bring peace, but which she suspected would only bring new forms of pain. "Miss Winters, we've discovered evidence at your former residence on Elderwood Lane. Evidence that suggests Emma and Patricia were held there after their disappearance. I need you to come to the station. There's a lot we need to discuss." Rachel's hand went to her mouth. "Held there? In my house?"
The current owners were doing renovations and found a concealed room. There are messages carved into the walls, names. We need to verify some details, and I'd like to discuss next steps with you in person. The floor seemed to shift beneath Rachel's feet. A concealed room. Messages. After all these years of imagining her daughter and mother taken far away, held in some distant place, suffering in locations she could never know, they had been there. In the house. While Rachel searched and grieved and eventually moved away, they had been trapped behind walls she'd walked past every day. "Miss Winters, are you still there?" "Yes," Rachel managed. "I'm here. I can come now. I'm at Providence. I can be there in 20 minutes. "That would be helpful. Ask for me at the front desk." Rachel ended the call and stood motionless in the exam room, her mind struggling to process what she just heard. A colleague appeared in the doorway, concern crossing her face. "Rachel, you okay? I heard something fall." "I need to leave," Rachel interrupted, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Family emergency. Can you cover my last 2 hours?" "Of course, but what?" Rachel was already moving, grabbing her bag from the staff room, her hands shaking as she searched for her car keys. Other nurses watched her rush past, but she couldn't stop to explain, couldn't form the words yet. The drive to the police station passed in a blur. Rachel's mind kept circling back to the same terrible thought. If Emma and Patricia had been in the house, if they'd been held there in some hidden room, then someone had put them there. Someone had built that concealment. And the only person living in that house after Rachel left had been the landlord who'd taken it over when she couldn't make rent anymore. Gordon Hale.
She'd met him only twice. Once when she'd signed the lease in 1995, and once in early 1998 when she'd finally admitted she couldn't afford to stay in the house anymore, couldn't bear to live in the place where her family had vanished. He'd been understanding, waiving the remaining months on her lease, even helping her move some furniture. She'd been grateful for his kindness during the worst period of her life. Had he been the one? Had he stood in her kitchen offering sympathy while Emma and Patricia were trapped somewhere in the walls? Rachel's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her breath coming faster. She forced herself to slow down, to focus on the road. She needed to get to the station. She needed to know. The police bureau was busy with afternoon shift changes, uniformed officers coming and going, civilians at the front desk filing reports. Rachel gave her name to the desk sergeant, who made a call and then directed her to wait. She sat in a plastic chair, her leg bouncing with nervous energy, until Detective Moreno appeared. The detective was smaller than Rachel had imagined from her voice, with kind eyes that had seen too much. She extended her hand. "Ms. Winters, thank you for coming so quickly. Please follow me." They walked through corridors lined with bulletin boards and wanted posters to a small conference room. Inside, folders and photographs were spread across the table. Detective Moreno gestured for Rachel to sit. "I want to prepare you before I show you anything," the detective said gently. "Some of this is going to be difficult to see." "Show me," Rachel said.
I need to know everything.
Detective Moreno opened the first folder, revealing photographs of a narrow room with brick walls. The images showed scratched messages on the floor, tally marks on the walls, a wooden chair. Rachel's vision blurred with tears as she read Emma's name carved into the concrete. "We found this room behind a false wall in what's currently the master bedroom," Detective Moreno explained. "It was completely sealed. The current owners only discovered it during renovations." "Gordon Hale," Rachel whispered. "He was the landlord. After they disappeared, I couldn't afford the house alone, so he took it over. He lived there until he died." 2019, Detective Moreno confirmed. "Heart attack." "Ms. Winters, I need you to understand. We're treating this as a crime scene now. We're bringing in additional resources, ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs. We're going to search every inch of that property." Rachel closed her eyes. "You're looking for bodies." "We're looking for answers," Detective Moreno said carefully. "The messages suggest Emma and Patricia were alive in that room for an extended period. The tally marks indicate months. But we don't know what happened after. We don't know if they're still—" She stopped, reconsidering her words. "We need to follow every lead." Rachel opened her eyes and looked at the photographs again. Her daughter's handwriting, still recognizable after all these years. The same careful letters Emma had used on her homework, on birthday cards, on notes left on the refrigerator. But these letters were desperate, gouged into concrete with something sharp, a child's plea for help that no one had heard. "I want to see it," Rachel said. "The room, the house. I need to see where they were." Detective Moreno hesitated. "It's still an active crime scene. We can't allow civilian access until—" "Please," Rachel's voice cracked. "I've spent 27 years not knowing where they were, imagining them in 1,000 different places. Now you're telling me they were in my house, in a room I didn't know existed, and you're asking me to just sit here and wait for reports. I need to see it." The detective studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Tomorrow morning, after the overnight team finishes processing, I'll arrange it." Rachel nodded, not trusting her voice. Detective Moreno continued explaining what they'd found, what steps they were taking, what Rachel might expect in the coming days. But Rachel's attention kept returning to the photographs, to the evidence that her daughter had survived for months in darkness, counting days, carving messages. Had Emma known her mother was looking? Had she heard Rachel's voice on the other side of those walls calling for her, searching for her? Had she scratched at the walls while Rachel slept in her own bedroom, separated by plaster and wood and ignorance? The thought was unbearable.
The hotel room felt too quiet. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her scrubs, staring at the folder Detective Moreno had given her. Copies of the initial crime scene photos and reports. She'd read through them 3 times now, absorbing details that would be seared into her memory forever. 46-3 tally marks. More than 15 months. Emma had been 10 years old when she disappeared. She would have turned 12 in that hidden room if she'd lived that long. Rachel's phone buzzed. Her sister Jennifer calling for the 4th time. Rachel had texted her the basics. Police found evidence. More information coming. We'll call tomorrow. But she hadn't been able to face an actual conversation. She let it go to voicemail. Another buzz. A text from Jennifer. "The news is saying they found a hidden room in your old house. Rachel, please call me. I'm coming to Portland." So it was public now. Rachel picked up the remote and turned on the television, flipping through channels until she found local news. There it was. Aerial footage of the Elderwood Lane house, police vehicles surrounding it. Crime scene tape bright against the evening darkness. Shocking discovery in the 27-year-old disappearance of Emma Winters and Patricia Kellerman, the anchor was saying. Sources confirmed that investigators have found what appears to be a concealed room in the Portland home where the two were last seen in 1997. The property was owned at the time by Gordon Hale, who died in 2019. Police are not yet confirming whether they've discovered human remains, but they have expanded the search to include the entire property. Rachel muted the television and closed her eyes. Gordon Hale. She tried to remember details about him beyond those 2 brief meetings. He'd been in his early 50s when she'd met him. Tall and thin, with a quiet voice and nervous hands that were always fidgeting with something. He'd worn glasses with thick frames and dressed in button-up shirts that looked slightly too big for his frame. There had been something off about him that Rachel had attributed to simple social awkwardness.
He'd been overly sympathetic about the disappearance, asking detailed questions about the police investigation, about what they were doing to find Emma and Patricia. At the time, Rachel had thought he was just being a concerned landlord. Now, those questions took on a different tone. Had he been checking to see how close the police were getting, making sure they hadn't suspected him? Rachel's phone rang again. This time, it was Detective Moreno. "Ms. Winters, I wanted to update you before you hear it on the news. We found something in the attic." Rachel's breath caught. "What?" "Another concealed space, smaller than the first room, but it was clearly used. We found personal items inside, clothing, some books, a collection of photographs. The photographs appear to be surveillance images taken inside the house. They show you, your daughter, your mother, candid shots taken without your knowledge." Rachel felt sick. He was watching us. Before he took them, he was watching us? "It appears so. The photographs date back to 1995, when you first moved in. There are hundreds of them. He had a camera system set up in the attic, with holes drilled through the ceiling to various rooms. The technology is outdated now, but at the time it would have been relatively sophisticated." "What rooms?" Rachel asked, though part of her didn't want to know. A pause. "All of them, Miss Winters, including bedrooms and bathrooms."
Rachel stood and walked to the hotel bathroom, feeling like she might be sick. She gripped the edge of the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. For 2.5 years before the disappearance, she and Emma had lived in that house, believing they were safe, private. And the entire time, Gordon Hale had been watching them from the attic, documenting their lives, planning. "There's more," Detective Moreno continued. "We found journals, detailed entries describing his observations, his thoughts. Miss Winters, this is going to be very difficult to hear, but we believe Gordon Hale was obsessed with your family, specifically with Emma and your mother. He took them because he was obsessed?" Rachel said, her voice hollow. "The journals suggest he'd been planning it for months, watching routines, noting when you worked late shifts, identifying windows of opportunity. The entry from October 14th, 1997, describes how he knocked on your door that evening while you were at the hospital. The delivery man, Rachel thought. Patricia had mentioned a delivery man in her last phone call to Rachel, though she'd been rushed and hadn't elaborated. Rachel had been handling a patient emergency and had promised to call back later. By the time she tried, no one answered. "The forensics team is going through everything carefully," Detective Moreno said. "We're building a timeline, but I wanted you to know what we're finding before it becomes public. The media is going to run with this hard. Have you found—" Rachel couldn't finish the sentence. "Not yet, but we're still searching. The cadaver dogs will be there at first light."
After the call ended, Rachel sat on the bathroom floor, her back against the cold tile wall. The hotel room suddenly felt too small, too enclosed. She thought about Emma, trapped in that hidden room, Patricia beside her, both of them knowing that Rachel was out there somewhere, looking for them, never suspecting they were so close. Had Hale kept them alive for those 15 months? The tally marks suggested he had. Why? What had he wanted from them? The questions circled in Rachel's mind like vultures. She thought about the messages carved into the walls. "He watches from the attic." Emma had figured out where he was coming from. Had she hoped someone would find the messages? Or had she simply needed to write the truth somewhere to make it real? Rachel's phone buzzed again. Another text from Jennifer. "Flight booked. arriving 9 a.m. tomorrow. Please let me come with you. Rachel typed back, "Okay." She couldn't face this alone anymore. For 27 years, she'd carried the weight of not knowing, the guilt of going to work that night, of not being home to protect them. She'd constructed elaborate scenarios.
Rachel pulled out her own old photo album from her bag. She'd brought it from home without really thinking about why. Now she opened it, looking at pictures of Emma at various ages. The last photo had been taken 2 weeks before the disappearance. Emma holding up a spelling test with a gold star on it, her smile wide and proud, gap-toothed and beautiful. That smile had been real. That happiness had been genuine. For 10 years, Emma had been safe and loved and normal. And then, one October evening, everything had changed, because a man who'd watched them from the darkness had decided to act. Rachel closed the album and pressed it against her chest, letting herself finally cry. Not the controlled tears she'd shed over the years, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from the core of her being, for Emma, for Patricia, for the 27 years they'd spent in some form of hell while Rachel searched in all the wrong places. Tomorrow she would see the room. Tomorrow she would face the physical reality of what had happened. But tonight, alone in an anonymous hotel room, Rachel Winters allowed herself to break under the weight of knowing.
Jennifer arrived at the hotel before sunrise, letting herself into Rachel's room with the spare keycard. She found her sister sitting in the chair by the window, still dressed in yesterday's scrubs, staring at the dark city. "Rachel," Jennifer said softly. Rachel turned. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed from crying and lack of sleep. Jennifer crossed the room and pulled her into a tight embrace. They stood like that for a long moment, Jennifer holding her older sister the way Rachel had once held her when they were children. "I can't believe it," Jennifer whispered. "All this time, they were there." "Detective Moreno said I can see the room this morning," Rachel said, her voice hoarse. "Will you come with me?" "Of course." They arrived at the Elderwood Lane house just after 7. The street was lined with news vans, reporters doing stand-ups in front of cameras, neighbors gathered in small clusters watching the activity. Police had established a wider perimeter overnight, keeping everyone at least 50 yards from the property. Detective Moreno met them at the barrier, her face showing the strain of a sleepless night. "Ms. Winters, thank you for coming. I'll escort you in, but I need to prepare you. We found additional evidence overnight." Rachel's stomach clenched. "What kind of evidence?" "Let's go inside. I'd prefer to show you rather than explain."
They walked toward the house, Jennifer holding Rachel's hand tightly. Crime scene technicians were still working, their white suits moving through rooms visible through the windows. The front door stood open, and as they climbed the porch steps, Rachel was struck by how familiar it all looked. The same door she'd unlocked thousands of times, the same porch where Emma had played with sidewalk chalk. Inside, the house had been transformed. Equipment filled every corner, evidence markers numbered in yellow plastic, photography lights on tall stands. But underneath the investigation apparatus, Rachel could see the bones of the home she'd lived in, the hardwood floors she'd walked barefoot on summer mornings, the archway between the living room and dining room where she'd hung Christmas lights. "This way," Detective Moreno said, leading them toward the stairs. Rachel's legs felt heavy as she climbed to the second floor. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall, the room that had been hers, where she'd slept while her daughter and mother were trapped behind the walls. The door was open, harsh lights illuminating everything. The hole Marcus Chen had punched through the plaster had been widened significantly, creating an opening large enough to walk through easily. Rachel approached it slowly, Jennifer's hand still gripping hers. "Take your time," Detective Moreno said. Rachel stepped through into the hidden room and felt the air leave her lungs. It was smaller than she'd imagined from the photographs, barely large enough for 2 people. The brick walls seemed to press in from all sides. The tally marks covered nearly half of one wall, each cluster of 5 a testament to a day survived in darkness. She knelt on the concrete floor, her fingers hovering over the carved words without quite touching them. Emma's name,
Patricia's name, the desperate plea for help that had gone unanswered for 27 years. "We found traces of DNA on the chair and floor," Detective Moreno said quietly. "We're running comparisons now, but preliminary results suggest at least 2 individuals were in this space for an extended period." Rachel stood and turned to face the wall with the tally marks. 463 days. She tried to imagine her daughter sitting here in darkness, counting each day, carving each mark with whatever sharp object she'd managed to find or been given. "What happened after?" Rachel asked, "after the tally marks stopped?" Detective Moreno exchanged a glance with another investigator standing nearby. "That's what we're still trying to determine. The journal entries we found in the attic end abruptly in March 1999. The last entry is incomplete, like he was interrupted mid-sentence. After that, nothing." "He died in 2019, Rachel said. "What was he doing for 20 years if they were already—" She couldn't finish. "We don't know, but we found something else this morning that might provide answers, in the basement." They descended to the lower level where more investigators were working. The basement was unfinished, with exposed beams and a concrete floor. In the far corner, technicians had cleared away years of accumulated storage, old furniture, boxes, paint cans, to reveal a door painted bright red, the red door mentioned in the wall messages. "We haven't opened it yet," Detective Moreno said. "We wanted to document everything first, but there's something you should know." She gestured to one of the technicians, who held up an evidence bag containing a small brass key. "We found this in Gordon Hale's bedroom upstairs, hidden inside a book. Based on the size and style, we believe it's meant for this door." Rachel stared at the red door. It was ordinary in every way except its color, a standard wooden door with brass hardware, probably original to the house's 1920s construction. But someone had painted it red, making it stand out, marking it as significant. "What do you think is behind it?" Jennifer asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly behind that wall," Detective Moreno said carefully. "Approximately 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, buried under the concrete floor. We're treating it as a possible gravesite." Rachel felt Jennifer's hand tighten around hers. 2 bodies. 6 feet long would be enough for an adult and child, especially if they'd been there since 1999. "When will you open it?" Rachel asked. "Within the hour. We're waiting for the medical examiner and additional forensic staff. Miss Winters, you don't have to stay for this. In fact, I'd recommend—" "I'm staying," Rachel interrupted. "I need to know."
Detective Moreno nodded. "Then I need you to wait upstairs. This has to be processed carefully, and I can't have civilians in the immediate area. I'll come get you when we're ready." Rachel and Jennifer retreated to the main floor, settling in what had once been the dining room. Through the windows, they could see more vehicles arriving: the medical examiner's van, additional police units, a truck with sophisticated-looking equipment. "Rachel," Jennifer said quietly, "are you sure you want to be here for this? If there are remains. I've waited 27 years to know what happened. I'm not leaving now." They sat in silence as activity intensified around them. Technicians carried equipment to the basement. Investigators consulted in low voices. Time seemed to move both too fast and too slow, minutes stretching like hours. Finally, Detective Moreno appeared in the doorway. Her expression was impossible to read. "We're ready," she said. "But before we proceed, I need to ask you something. In your mother's belongings, the things that were left behind when she disappeared, was there a necklace, a gold chain with a small heart pendant?" Rachel's breath caught. "Yes, my father gave it to her on their 20th anniversary. She wore it every day."
Detective Moreno held up an evidence bag. Inside was a tarnished gold chain with a small heart pendant. "We found this on the floor just inside the red door, before we opened it, before we disturbed anything. It was lying there, as if someone had dropped it or left it deliberately." Rachel stood on shaky legs. She was there, behind that door. "We're going to open it now, if you want to wait outside." "No," Rachel said firmly. "I'm coming down." They descended to the basement together, Rachel's heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The red door stood open now, revealing a narrow stone staircase leading down into darkness. Portable lights had been set up, illuminating rough stone walls and an earthen floor below. "This is a sub-basement," Detective Moreno explained, "common in houses from this era, used for coal storage or root cellars. Most were filled in over the years, but this one was maintained, expanded. Actually, the original would have been much smaller." Rachel could see where newer concrete had been poured around the edges, where the space had been deliberately enlarged.
In the center of the earthen floor, a rectangular section of concrete, newer than the rest, measured approximately 6 feet by 3 feet. The medical examiner was already there, along with 2 technicians with specialized tools. They began carefully breaking through the concrete, working slowly to preserve whatever might be beneath. Rachel watched from the stairs, Jennifer beside her, both of them holding their breath as the concrete gave way to reveal dark earth below. The technicians switched to hand tools, brushing away soil with delicate precision. And then, one of them stopped, leaning closer. "I've got something," he said quietly. More careful brushing revealed fabric, old fabric, deteriorated but still recognizable as clothing. A sleeve, a collar. The medical examiner moved in, working with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, the shape became clear. Human remains. 2 sets, positioned side by side in what appeared to be a deliberately careful arrangement. One adult-sized, one significantly smaller. "Female," the medical examiner said, examining the larger skeleton. "Based on pelvic structure, I'd estimate late 50s to mid-60s at time of death." She moved to the smaller remains. Also female, pre-adolescent, approximately 10 to 12 years old. Rachel's knees buckled, and Jennifer caught her, holding her upright. "Emma, Patricia."
After 27 years of searching, of hoping against hope that somehow they'd survived, that they'd escaped or been let go, or were living somewhere with amnesia, all the desperate scenarios Rachel had constructed to avoid this truth, here they were, buried in the basement of the house she'd lived in, the house she'd eventually abandoned. "I'm sorry," Detective Marino said, her professional composure cracking slightly. "I know this isn't what you wanted to find." Rachel shook her head. "I wanted the truth. I needed to know." She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. "Can you tell how they died?" The medical examiner continued her careful examination. "I'll need to do a full autopsy, but I'm seeing evidence of trauma to both skulls. Blunt force. Quick. Probably relatively painless. This was..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "This was done by someone who didn't want them to suffer." Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. Rachel looked at the remains of her daughter and mother, trying to reconcile these bones with the vibrant, living people she'd known. Emma's last drawing was still in a box in Rachel's closet, a crayon picture of a house with a family standing in front, everyone smiling. Patricia's knitting needles and unfinished scarf were still there too, 37 rows of navy blue yarn that would never become the gift she'd intended. "There's something else," one of the technicians said. He was crouching near where the smaller skeleton's hands would have been positioned. "Look at this."
Clasped in the delicate finger bones was a piece of paper, preserved by the dry earth and careful burial. The medical examiner extracted it with tweezers, placing it carefully on a clean surface. It was a note, written in a child's careful handwriting, the ink faded but still legible. "Dear Mama, Mr. Hale said he's sorry, but we can't stay anymore. He said God told him it was time. Grandma says not to be scared. She says we'll wait for you in heaven. I love you forever and ever. Emma." The letter was everywhere by evening. Someone at the police department had leaked a photo of it to the press, and now Emma's final words to her mother were being dissected by news anchors, shared across social media, analyzed by criminal psychologists on cable networks. Rachel sat in Detective Moreno's office, away from the chaos outside, staring at a photocopy of the note. The original was in evidence, being processed for fingerprints and DNA, but this copy was hers to keep. "The handwriting matches samples from Emma's schoolwork," Detective Moreno said. "We believe she wrote this shortly before she died. The reference to 'we can't stay anymore' and 'God told him it was time' suggests Hale was experiencing some kind of psychological break." "He killed them," Rachel said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "After keeping them alive for 15 months, he just decided to kill them."
The forensic psychiatrist reviewing Hale's journals
thinks he may have been deteriorating mentally. The later entries show increasing paranoia, religious delusions, fear that authorities were getting close. In March 1999, there was renewed media coverage of the disappearance. It was the 18-month anniversary. That might have been the trigger. Rachel studied her daughter's handwriting. Even facing death, Emma had tried to comfort her mother, to tell her not to worry. "I love you forever and ever." The words blurred as tears filled Rachel's eyes again. "What I don't understand," Jennifer said from the corner where she'd been sitting quietly, "is why he kept them alive for so long if he was just going to kill them. What was the point?" Detective Moreno pulled out a thick folder, Gordon Hale's journals. From what we can piece together, he didn't intend to kill them, at least not at first. His writing suggests he believed he was saving them from something. The entries are delusional, rambling, but there's a consistent theme about protecting them from the corrupt outside world. She opened the journal to a marked page and read aloud. "Patricia understands now. I've shown her the truth about the world's dangers. She helps teach Emma to be pure, to be safe. They're grateful for the sanctuary I've provided. We pray together each evening." Rachel felt sick. He thought they were grateful.
Delusional thinking is common in cases like this. He genuinely believed he was doing something good, that he was their protector rather than their captor. Detective Moreno closed the journal. But then something changed. The later entries show increasing fear, claims that demons were coming for them, that the only way to keep them safe was to release them from their earthly bodies. He convinced himself murdering them was an act of love, Jennifer said quietly. Essentially, yes. Detective Moreno pulled out another document. We also found his will, drawn up in 2018, a year before he died. He left everything to a church organization that doesn't exist, appears to be entirely fictitious. But in the will, there's a line that's relevant. "May my angels in the basement forgive me for failing them." Rachel pressed her hands to her face. Angels in the basement. That's how he thought of them, even decades later. Not victims, not prisoners, but angels he'd failed. "There's more," Detective Moreno continued. "We found evidence that Hale visited the sub-basement regularly throughout the years after their deaths. There were signs of maintenance. The area was kept clean, dry, temperature-controlled. He'd left items down there, religious texts, flowers that had long since decayed, photographs." "Photographs of what?" Rachel asked.
Detective Moreno hesitated, then pulled out a series of evidence photos. They showed the sub-basement before the excavation, with items arranged on a makeshift altar against one wall, candles, a small cross, and photographs. Pictures of Emma and Patricia taken from behind the walls during their captivity. In some, they were sitting on the floor of the hidden room. In others, they were sleeping. In a few, they appeared to be praying. He was visiting them, Rachel said, understanding, treating it like a shrine. It appears so. The psychological profile suggests Hale experienced significant guilt after their deaths, but was unable to admit what he'd done or seek help. Instead, he created this ritualized behavior, visiting regularly, maintaining the space, probably talking to them in his mind. Jennifer stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. How does a person get that sick without anyone noticing? Hale was isolating himself increasingly from the late 90s onward, Detective Moreno said. Neighbors describe him as reclusive. He'd retired early from his job as an insurance adjuster in 1998, about a year after the kidnapping. His financial records show he was living on savings and a small pension. No friends, no social connections, minimal interaction with the outside world. Rachel thought about the times she'd seen him after she moved out, chance encounters on the street in those early years. He'd always been kind, asking how she was coping, whether there was any news. She'd appreciated his concern, never suspected. Could we have found them earlier, Rachel asked, if we'd looked harder at him, if we'd—
"Miss Winters," Detective Moreno interrupted gently. "The original investigation did look at Hale. He was interviewed twice. He allowed police to search the house. But he was the landlord, not a tenant. He had a plausible reason for being there, for having keys. And he was cooperative, concerned, exactly what you'd expect from someone who wanted to help. And the hidden room was sealed. The sub-basement door was locked. Even when police searched, they wouldn't have found anything unless they'd torn apart walls and broken down doors without cause." Rachel knew this was meant to comfort her, but it didn't, because Emma and Patricia had been there, trapped and terrified, while police walked through the house looking for them. If the investigators had been more thorough, more suspicious, if they'd insisted on a more invasive search? "You can't think like that," Jennifer said, reading her sister's expression. "You'll drive yourself crazy with what-ifs." But Rachel had been living with what-ifs for 27 years. What if she hadn't gone to work that night? What if she'd come home earlier? What if she'd insisted on being there for dinner? The new knowledge didn't erase those old questions, it just added new ones. "We'll release the remains to you once the medical examiner completes her work," Detective Moreno said. "Probably within a week, if you need help making arrangements." "I'll take care of it," Rachel said. "I've had 27 years to think about this. I know exactly where I want them to be." After leaving the police station, Rachel and Jennifer drove in silence through the city. It was nearly midnight, the streets mostly empty.
Jennifer finally spoke. "Do you want to come stay with me? You shouldn't be alone tonight." "I need to make some calls," Rachel said. "Let people know. Emma's father, he deserves to hear it from me before he sees it on the news." She hadn't spoken to David in over a decade. They divorced 2 years after Emma disappeared, the grief too heavy for their marriage to bear. He'd remarried, moved to Seattle, started a new family. Rachel had followed his life from a distance through occasional mutual acquaintances. She wondered if he still thought about Emma every day, the way she did. Jennifer drove Rachel back to her house in the suburbs, the small bungalow she'd lived in for the past 15 years. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it when Detective Moreno called. Breakfast dishes still in the sink, her reading glasses on the coffee table, a load of laundry waiting in the dryer. Life interrupted by truth.
Rachel sat on her couch and dialed David's number. It rang 4 times before he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello?" "David, it's Rachel. I'm sorry to call so late." There was a pause, and she heard him moving, probably leaving the bedroom so he wouldn't wake his wife. "Rachel, what's wrong?" "They found her, David. They found Emma and my mom. I needed you to hear it from me." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was raw. "Found them where?" Rachel told him everything. The hidden room, the journals, the sub-basement, the note Emma had written. She heard him crying softly on the other end, the sound of a father's grief finally confirmed after decades of terrible limbo. "I should have been there," David said. "That night, I should have been there to protect her." "You were working in Eugene that week," Rachel reminded him. "You couldn't have known. None of us could have known." They talked for another hour, sharing memories of Emma, crying together across the distance. When Rachel finally ended the call, she felt emptied out, hollowed by grief, but also strangely lighter. The not knowing had been its own weight, one she'd carried so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. Now she knew.
Emma and Patricia had survived for 15 months before Gordon Hale's deteriorating mind had convinced them their deaths were mercy. They'd been afraid, but they'd been together. Patricia had comforted Emma through the darkness. Emma had written a final message of love. It wasn't the ending Rachel had hoped for through all those years of searching, but it was an ending. And after 27 years of terrible questions, perhaps endings were enough. The funeral was held on a gray morning in late May, the sky threatening rain but holding back, as if even the weather was showing respect. Rachel had chosen a cemetery on the east side of Portland, with a view of Mount Hood in the distance, the same cemetery where her father was buried, where Patricia had always said she wanted to rest beside him. Now she would, with Emma beside them both. The service was small. Jennifer and her family, a few of Rachel's colleagues from the hospital, some of Patricia's friends who were still alive, David and his wife making the drive from Seattle. No media was allowed, though Rachel knew helicopters were probably filming from a distance, that the funeral would be mentioned on the evening news. The caskets were closed. Rachel had been given the option to view the remains after the medical examiner's work was complete, but she declined. She wanted to remember Emma as she'd been, gap-toothed and laughing, holding up spelling tests with gold stars, dancing in the kitchen while Patricia cooked dinner. The bones in that basement weren't her daughter. They were just what was left behind.
The minister spoke about loss and faith and eternal rest. Rachel barely heard him. She stood at the graveside, holding the photocopy of Emma's final note in her pocket, her fingers tracing the words through the paper. I love you forever and ever. When it was time to speak, Rachel stepped forward. She'd written something the night before, but the words abandoned her now. Instead, she spoke from her heart. My daughter was kind, she said, her voice carrying across the small gathering. She was smart and funny, and she loved butterflies. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She was afraid of thunderstorms, but not of the dark. At least, not until... Rachel paused, steadying herself. My mother was strong. She raised 2 daughters on her own after my father died. She taught us to be brave, to stand up for what was right, to take care of each other. She looked at the caskets, both covered in white roses. They were together at the end. That's what I hold on to. Patricia was there to comfort Emma. Emma wasn't alone in the darkness. They had each other. Her voice broke, and Jennifer came to stand beside her, an arm around her waist. Rachel let her sister hold her up as she finished. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I didn't know where you were. But I never stopped looking. I never stopped loving you. And now you can finally rest. The caskets were lowered as the minister said final prayers. Rachel placed a single white rose on each one, Emma's favorite flower. She'd kept a pressed one from Emma's last birthday in her wallet for 27 years, and now she left it in the grave, a final gift returned. After the service, people gathered at Jennifer's house. Rachel moved through the crowd mechanically, accepting condolences, thanking people for coming. David approached her in the kitchen where she'd retreated for a moment of quiet. Rachel, he said, I wanted to give you this. He handed her a small box. Inside was a silver bracelet with tiny charms, a butterfly, a book, a heart. I had it made years ago, David explained, when Emma would have turned 16. I never knew what to do with it, but I think she'd want you to have it. Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. Thank you. I'm glad we know now, David said quietly. I know it's not the ending we wanted, but at least we know. At least we can say goodbye. Rachel nodded, unable to speak. David squeezed her shoulder and moved away, giving her space.
The rest of the afternoon blurred together. By evening, Rachel was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from holding yourself together through impossible circumstances. Jennifer offered to let her stay the night, but Rachel needed to go home, to be alone with her grief. She drove through the city as twilight fell, her mind drifting. Without consciously deciding to, she found herself turning onto Elderwood Lane. The house looked different now. The crime scene tape had been removed a week ago, the investigation officially concluded. Marcus and Alicia Chen had put the property up for sale. No one could blame them, but so far there had been no offers. Houses where terrible things happened rarely sold quickly, if at all. Rachel parked across the street and stared at the structure. In the fading light, it looked ordinary. Just another 1920s bungalow in need of updating. No sign of the horrors it had contained, the suffering it had witnessed. She got out of the car and walked closer, stopping at the property line. The front door was visible from here. The same door Gordon Hale had opened on that October evening in 1997, pretending to be a delivery man, using kindness as camouflage for evil. I should have known, Rachel whispered to the empty street. I should have seen it. But she couldn't have. That was the terrible truth Detective Moreno had tried to make her understand. Predators like Gordon Hale were experts at hiding in plain sight, at presenting themselves as helpful and harmless, while nurturing dark compulsions behind closed doors.
Movement in one of the upstairs windows caught Rachel's eye. She stepped back, startled, then realized it must be a reflection. Tree branches swaying in the evening breeze, catching the last light. But the movement came again, more distinct this time. A shadow passing behind the glass. Rachel's heart began to pound.
The house was supposed to be empty. The Chens had moved out, or staying elsewhere while they dealt with the sale. No one should be inside. She pulled out her phone, ready to call the police, when the front door opened. Detective Moreno stepped out onto the porch. Rachel lowered her phone, confusion replacing fear. Detective Moreno walked down to meet her at the sidewalk. "Miss Winters, I thought I saw your car. I was hoping we might run into each other." "What are you doing here?" Rachel asked.
"Final walkthrough. We closed the case officially yesterday, but I wanted to check one more time, make sure we didn't miss anything." She glanced back at the house. "I know it's unprofessional, but cases like this, they stay with you. I needed to see it one last time before it's sold or demolished or whatever happens to it." Rachel understood. She looked up at the second-floor window. "I thought I saw someone up there." "Just me. I was checking the attic one last time." Detective Moreno paused. "Do you want to come in, see it now that it's empty of investigators and equipment?" Rachel hesitated. Part of her wanted to run, to never set foot in this place again, but another part, the part that had spent 27 years searching for answers, needed to see it with new eyes. "Yes," she said, "I think I do."
They walked to the house together. The interior was dim, only emergency lighting from the utility company providing illumination. Their footsteps echoed on the bare floors as they moved through the first level. Rachel could almost see the ghosts of her old life here. Emma's toys scattered in the corner, Patricia's knitting basket by the window, the television playing in the evening while dinner cooked. "The new owners are good people," Detective Moreno said as they climbed the stairs. "They were horrified by what they found. They want you to know that." "I don't blame them for selling," Rachel replied. "Who would want to live here after this?" They reached the master bedroom. The hole in the wall had been left open, the hidden room visible beyond. Rachel approached it slowly, the same way she had that first morning when Detective Moreno had brought her here. Inside the small space, the messages were still visible on the floor and walls, though forensic teams had taken samples of the concrete and brick around them. Rachel knelt and placed her hand on Emma's carved name. "I'm sorry I couldn't hear you," she whispered. "I'm so sorry."
Detective Moreno gave her privacy, stepping back into the bedroom. Rachel stayed in the hidden room for several minutes, saying a silent goodbye to this terrible place. When she finally emerged, she felt something shift inside her. Not closure, exactly, but a release. She'd seen where they'd suffered. She'd acknowledged it. Now she could let it go. "There's something I didn't tell you before," Detective Moreno said as they descended the stairs. "We found one more journal entry. It was separate from the others, hidden in Hale's bedroom, written just days before he died." She pulled out her phone and showed Rachel a photograph of a handwritten page. The writing was shakier than the earlier journal entries, the hand of an old man rather than the steady script of someone in middle age. Rachel read, "I am dying. The doctors say my heart is failing," which seems fitting. "It failed Emma and Patricia long ago, when I let my sickness consume my reason. I told myself I was protecting them, that the world outside was too corrupt and dangerous. But I was the danger. I was the corruption. I dream of them every night. They stand at the foot of my bed. Not angry, but sad. Patricia asks why I did it. Emma just watches me with those innocent eyes. I have no answer for them, except that I was broken, and I broke them too. When I die, they will still be in the basement, waiting for someone to find them. Maybe no one ever will. Maybe this house will stand forever, with my sin buried in its foundation. I pray someone finds them. I pray Rachel finds peace. I pray God has mercy, though I deserve none." Rachel handed the phone back, her hands shaking. He knew what he'd done was wrong. At the end, he knew. Guilt Detective Moreno said, but not enough guilt to confess, to tell someone where they were. Even dying, he chose to protect himself over giving you answers. They walked to the front door together. Outside, full darkness had fallen, streetlights casting pools of yellow light along Elderwood Lane. Rachel turned to look at the house one final time. "What will happen to it?" she asked. "The Chens will probably take a loss and sell to a developer. Most likely it'll be torn down, rebuilt as something modern. This neighborhood is gentrifying rapidly." Good, Rachel thought. Let it be erased. Let something new grow here, something without shadows. "Thank you," she said to Detective Moreno, "for everything you did, for finding them. I wish we'd found them sooner, found them alive." "So do I, but you gave me the truth, and that's something." Rachel touched the bracelet David had given her, feeling the small charms shift against her wrist. "I can finally let them rest now." She walked to her car and drove away from Elderwood Lane for the last time. In her rearview mirror, she watched the house recede into darkness until it disappeared completely.
3 months later, Rachel stood in the pediatric wing of Providence Portland Medical Center, checking inventory in the supply closet. It was mundane work, the kind that let her mind wander. And today, it wandered to the news she'd received that morning. The Elderwood Lane house had been demolished. Jennifer had texted her a photo, an excavator tearing through the structure, reducing it to rubble. The lot would be cleared and sold, probably divided into 2 smaller lots for new construction. Nothing would remain of the place where her family had suffered and died. Rachel had looked at the photo for a long time, waiting to feel something. Relief? Satisfaction? Anger? But all she'd felt was tired. Tired of carrying this story, of being the woman whose daughter and mother had been kidnapped and murdered by their landlord. Tired of true crime documentaries wanting to interview her, of online sleuths dissecting every detail of the case, of strangers offering theories and sympathy in equal measure. She declined all media requests. The story was told, the questions answered. Now she just wanted to live whatever life remained to her, without being defined by what had been taken. "Rachel?" A colleague poked her head into the supply room. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's important." Rachel frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. She followed her colleague to the nursing station, where a young woman waited, mid-20s, with nervous hands and a familiar expression of uncertainty. "Miss Winters?" the woman said. "I'm Amanda Hale, Gordon Hale's daughter."
Rachel froze. She'd known Hale had been married once, decades ago, that he'd had a daughter who'd grown up and moved away, but she'd never expected to meet her. "I know this is strange," Amanda continued quickly, "and I'll understand if you want me to leave, but I've been wanting to talk to you since everything came out, to say I'm sorry." "You have nothing to apologize for," Rachel said automatically. "Please, can we talk somewhere private, just for a few minutes?" Rachel led her to a small consultation room and closed the door. They sat across from each other, Amanda clutching a bag in her lap. "My father and I weren't close," Amanda began. "My mother left him when I was 7, took me to California. I saw him maybe 5 times after that, mostly awkward visits where we didn't know what to say to each other. The last time was at my mother's funeral in 2015. He seemed different, distant, like he was somewhere else in his head." She opened her bag and pulled out a small photo album. "After he died, his estate sent me his personal effects. I didn't want most of it, but I kept this photo album because it had pictures of my mom when she was young. I never really looked through the whole thing until after the news broke about what he'd done." Amanda opened the album to a marked page and turned it toward Rachel. The photograph showed a much younger Gordon Hale, maybe in his 20s, standing with a woman and a small girl, presumably Amanda and her mother. But it was the inscription beneath that Amanda was pointing to. In neat handwriting, someone had written, "The first family I failed. May God forgive me for what I've become." "There are more," Amanda said, flipping through pages. Each family photo had a similar inscription. "I was sick even then, but didn't know it. The darkness was always there, waiting. I should have gotten help before I hurt anyone." Rachel stared at the photographs.
at the confessions hidden in a family album that no one had read until now. He knew something was wrong with him, Amanda said. Maybe for his whole life. But he never got help, never told anyone. And because of that, her voice broke. Because of that, your family suffered. Your daughter and mother died. Amanda, Rachel said gently, you were a child when all this happened. You're not responsible for your father's actions. I know that logically, but it doesn't stop me from feeling it. Amanda closed the album. I wanted you to see this, to know that whatever was broken in him, it was there long before he met you and your family. It wasn't anything you did or didn't do. He was always going to hurt someone.
Rachel nodded slowly. She'd wondered sometimes if there was something she'd missed, some sign she could have recognized. But Detective Moreno had shown her research on people like Gordon Hale. They were experts at concealment, at functioning in society while hiding their compulsions. Even trained professionals missed the signs. Thank you for showing me this, Rachel said. I know it couldn't have been easy to come here. There's one more thing. Amanda pulled out an envelope. I've set up a scholarship fund in Emma's name, for girls who want to study veterinary medicine. My father left me some money when he died, and I can't keep it. It feels tainted, so I'm using it for this instead. I wanted to ask your permission first. Rachel took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was information about the Emma Winters Memorial Scholarship, administered through Oregon State University, first award to be given next fall. She wanted to be a veterinarian, Rachel whispered. I know, I read about her. She sounded wonderful. Amanda stood. I won't take up any more of your time. I just needed you to know that not everyone in the Hale family is, that some of us want to do better, want to make something good from all this terrible legacy.
After Amanda left, Rachel sat alone in the consultation room, the scholarship information in one hand, the photo album Amanda had left for her in the other. She opened it again, reading through Gordon Hale's confessions to himself, his acknowledgement of the darkness he carried. It didn't excuse what he'd done. Nothing could. But it did answer one of her lingering questions, whether he'd been aware of his own sickness. He had been, and he'd chosen silence anyway. Chosen to let that sickness grow until it consumed innocent lives. Rachel's shift ended at 6. She drove home through evening traffic, the scholarship envelope on the passenger seat beside her. At home, she made dinner. Just pasta with vegetables, nothing fancy, and ate while watching the news. The Elderwood Lane case wasn't mentioned. Other tragedies had taken its place in the news cycle. Other families were now experiencing their own versions of Rachel's nightmare. After dinner, she opened her laptop and searched for the cemetery where Emma and Patricia were buried. The cemetery had a virtual memorial page where people could leave messages. Rachel scrolled through them. Condolences from strangers, prayers, messages from people who'd followed the case. And then she saw one from earlier that day, posted anonymously.
Dear Emma, I never knew you, but I know you were loved. Your mama never stopped looking for you. Your grandma never left your side. You were so brave in the darkness. I hope wherever you are now, there's sunshine and butterflies and all the things you loved. You deserved so much better than what this world gave you. Rachel read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of grief this time, but something else. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. Recognition that Emma's story mattered to people, that strangers cared, that her daughter's brief life had touched others. She typed her own message. To my Emma and my mother Patricia, I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry you suffered. But I promise I'll keep living, keep finding joy where I can, keep making your memory matter. The scholarship will help other girls achieve the dreams you never got to chase. Your story will help people understand the importance of paying attention, of trusting instincts, of protecting the vulnerable. You didn't die for nothing. I won't let you. I love you both, forever and always. Mama. She posted it and closed the laptop. Outside her window, the summer evening was warm and golden.
Rachel walked into her backyard, where she'd planted a butterfly garden last month. Milkweed and lavender and coneflowers, all Emma's favorites. Already, she'd spotted several monarchs visiting the flowers. She sat on her back porch and watched them dance among the blooms, their orange and black wings catching the last light. Emma would have loved this, would have grabbed her observation notebook and sketched them, carefully noting their patterns and behaviors. She pulled out her phone and took a photo of a monarch resting on a purple coneflower. She sent it to Jennifer with a simple message, "Emma's butterflies." Her sister's response came quickly, "She's there with you." Maybe she was. Maybe in the flight of butterflies and the smell of lavender and the warm summer breeze, Emma was there. Not trapped in darkness anymore, but free and light and dancing in the sunshine she'd been denied for so long.
Rachel sat on her porch until the sun set completely, watching the butterflies settle for the night. Tomorrow, she would go to work. She would check on her patients, restock supplies, have lunch with colleagues. She would live the ordinary life that Emma and Patricia never got to finish. But tonight, she would sit in her garden and remember. Remember Emma's gap-toothed smile. Remember Patricia's firm hugs and gentle wisdom. Remember that love doesn't end with death, that the people we've lost stay with us in the small moments, in the butterflies that visit our gardens, in the scholarships that bear their names, in the way we choose to move forward despite the weight of grief. The truth about what happened on Elderwood Lane would always be terrible, but it was no longer unknown. And in the knowing, Rachel had found not closure. Closure was a myth she'd learned, but something more valuable. She'd found the strength to keep going, to honor their memory by living fully, to transform tragedy into purpose. And for now, on this warm summer evening, with butterflies settling into sleep around her, that was enough. 5 years later, Dr. Maya Patel stood at the podium in the Oregon State University auditorium, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd of students, faculty, and guests gathered for the annual scholarship ceremony. The Emma Winters Memorial Scholarship was established to honor a young girl who loved animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Maya said, "Though Emma never got the chance to pursue that dream, her memory lives on through the students we recognize today."
In the front row, Rachel Winters sat between Jennifer and David, her hands folded in her lap. The bracelet with its butterfly charm caught the light as she shifted slightly. 5 years since Emma and Patricia had been found. 5 years since Rachel had learned the truth about that October evening in 1997. The years had been hard, but healing. Therapy had helped. So had the garden, which had expanded to fill most of her backyard. Now she'd become something of an expert on butterflies, could identify dozens of species, knew which plants attracted which visitors. Local schools sometimes invited her to speak to children about butterfly conservation, and she always said yes, grateful for the connection to Emma's passion. This year's recipient, Maya continued, maintained a 4.0 GPA while working part-time at an animal shelter and volunteering with wildlife rehabilitation programs. Please join me in congratulating Sarah Chen. Rachel watched as a young woman stood and walked to the stage. Chen, the same last name as Marcus and Alicia, the couple who discovered the hidden room. Rachel had learned from Amanda Hale that Marcus and Alicia had sold the Elderwood Lane property at a significant loss, using some of the money to contribute to the scholarship fund. Their way of making something good from the horror they'd uncovered. Sarah Chen accepted her award certificate, tears in her eyes as she looked out at the audience. "Thank you," she said into the microphone. "I promise to honor Emma's memory by working hard and helping animals who can't help themselves." After the ceremony, there was a reception in the lobby. Rachel stood near the refreshment table, watching students celebrate their achievements. Sarah Chen approached her, the award certificate still in her hands.
"Ms. Winters, I wanted to thank you personally. This scholarship is making it possible for me to focus on my studies instead of working full-time. It means everything." "Emma would be so proud," Rachel said, meaning it.
She had such a big heart for animals. I'm glad her memory can help others pursue that calling. Sarah hesitated, then said, I read about what happened, about how they found her. I can't imagine what you went through, but I want you to know, Emma's story changed how I think about the world, about paying attention to people who might need help, about not looking away from hard truths. Rachel squeezed the young woman's hand. That's exactly the kind of legacy she deserves. Thank you for understanding that. After Sarah moved away to join her family, Jennifer appeared at Rachel's elbow. You okay? Better than okay, Rachel said. This is good. This helps. They drove back to Portland together, Jennifer's family following in their own car. They'd made a tradition of visiting the cemetery after each scholarship ceremony, bringing flowers and spending a quiet hour by the graves. The cemetery was peaceful in the late afternoon, long shadows stretching across the grass. Rachel and Jennifer walked to the shared plot where Emma, Patricia, and their father all rested. The headstone was simple granite with 3 names and a small carved butterfly between them. Rachel placed fresh lilies by the stone, Patricia's favorite. Jennifer added the roses she preferred. Another scholarship awarded, Rachel said softly, as if reporting to them. Sarah Chen. She's brilliant and kind, and she's going to make a wonderful veterinarian. I think Emma would have liked her. They stood in companionable silence for a while. Rachel had learned that grief never really ended, but it changed. The sharp, desperate pain of the early years had mellowed into something softer, still sad, but tinged with gratitude for the time they'd had together, however brief. I got an email from Detective Moreno last week, Rachel said. She's retiring. Wanted to let me know personally. She was good to you, Jennifer observed. She cared. That meant something. Rachel touched the butterfly on the headstone. She told me the case still haunts her. Wishes she could have found them sooner. We all wish that. I told her the same thing I eventually had to tell myself. We can't change the past. We can only decide what we do with the present. As they walked back to the car, Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Hale. They'd stayed in occasional contact over the years, Amanda's guilt gradually transforming into purposeful action. She'd become a therapist specializing in family trauma, using her own experience to help others. The text read, "Thinking of you today. Hope the ceremony was beautiful." Rachel typed back, "It was. Thank you for everything you've done." "Emma's legacy is growing." The response came quickly. "That's all any of us can hope for. To leave the world a little better than we found it." Rachel pocketed her phone and looked at the cemetery one last time before getting in the car. Emma and Patricia were at rest now. No more darkness, no more fear. No more counting days in a hidden room behind false walls. The house on Elderwood Lane was gone, replaced by 2 modern townhouses where young families lived, completely unaware of the ground's dark history. The sub-basement had been filled in during demolition, the red door destroyed, the hiding places erased. But Emma's name lived on, in scholarship awards, in butterfly gardens, in the careful attention Rachel paid to children who seemed troubled or afraid, in the way Amanda Hale helped her clients heal from family trauma, in the changes the Portland Police Department had made to their missing persons protocols, training officers to look deeper, to question more thoroughly, to never assume that absence of evidence meant evidence of absence. Gordon Hale had tried to erase Emma and Patricia, to hide them away where no one would ever find them. But he'd failed. They'd been found. Their story had been told. And from that terrible truth, something meaningful had grown. Rachel drove home as evening settled over the city. Her butterfly garden would be full of life tomorrow morning, monarchs and swallowtails and painted ladies dancing among the flowers. She would photograph them, catalog them in the journal she kept, maybe sketch a few. And she would think of Emma, who had loved butterflies, who had dreamed of helping animals, who had been brave in darkness and kind until the very end. "I love you forever and ever," Rachel whispered to the twilight, repeating the words Emma had carved into concrete 27 years ago. And in the flutter of wings outside her window, in the gentle breeze through her garden, in the scholarship bearing her daughter's name, Rachel felt the echo of a response. "Forever and ever, Mama."